The morning mist clung to the pines of Montana like a ghost that refused to leave. Ethan Grayson, a 60-year-old war veteran, lifted his coffee mug, watching his German shepherd, Rex, circle the old oak tree at the edge of their land. It wasn't Rex's usual bark, not the alert one for deer or coyotes. This sound was primal, desperate, almost human. Ethan frowned. That dog had faced down bears and blizzards without flinching, but now he whimpered, backing away from the tree as if it breathed something evil. The trunk bulged 6 feet up, swollen and wrong, like the forest itself was hiding a heartbeat. Thick, black sap oozed from its cracks, carrying a smell that twisted Ethan's stomach. Not pine, not earth, something alive and dead. Rex's amber eyes met his master's, pleading, warning. Ethan reached for the old combat knife he hadn't touched in years. Some secrets, he thought, the earth keeps for 15 years, and some it's ready to give back. Montana wore winter like a secret it refused to share. The morning sky over Pine Hollow was the color of cold iron, and the fog hung low, heavy, and wet, the kind that clung to the trees and turned every sound into an echo. Frost silvered the wooden fences, and somewhere in the distance, a single crow croaked, breaking the silence that blanketed the valley. Pine Hollow wasn't much of a town. A pair of stoplights, a diner that still served black coffee for $1, and a hardware store where everyone pretended not to gossip. Beyond town, 5 miles up a dirt road that wound through timber and shale, stood a small log cabin crouched beneath a ridge. Smoke rose thin from its chimney, dissolving into the mist. That cabin belonged to Jack Turner, a 60-year-old war veteran who'd stopped looking for peace and settled instead for quiet. Jack looked like a man carved from the same pine he split for firewood. 6'1", broad-shouldered, hands thick from years of manual work. His hair had gone gray at the temples but still carried the stubborn wave of his youth. His face bore lines that told more truth than he ever would. Grooves of endurance, not defeat. A faded scar ran down his left forearm, and a day's worth of stubble shadowed a jaw that never seemed to relax. His eyes were blue-gray, the color of a winter lake. Deep, reflective, hard to read. He wore a wool jacket, flannel shirt, and jeans faded by time. The world had called him Sergeant once, but now he was just Jack, a man who lived alone, with his ghosts and his dog. That dog was Rex, an 8-year-old German shepherd with a coat like burnished bronze under the frost and eyes as amber as autumn whiskey. He was big, close to 90 pounds of disciplined muscle and unspoken loyalty. The scar along his hind leg was a memory from barbed wire in the second winter here, and Jack still felt guilty every time he looked at it. Rex didn't bark at shadows. He didn't chase cars or deer. He was trained, calm, and observant, the kind of animal that could feel a man's heartbeat before the man knew it was racing. The morning started the same as every other. Jack stood on his porch with a steaming mug of black coffee, staring into the fog as Rex trotted along the tree line, nose to the ground. The forest beyond his land was old, oak, pine, and fir intertwined like the bones of time. He liked that about Montana. It didn't care who you were. It outlasted everyone. He took a sip, the bitter warmth grounding him, when Rex's bark shattered the stillness. It wasn't his normal bark, not the sharp, alert cry he gave when deer crossed the ridge, but something deeper, rawer, like a warning pulled from the base of his lungs. Jack froze, mug halfway to his mouth. Rex was circling the old oak near the property's edge, tail rigid, ears pinned flat. In 8 years, Jack had never seen him act like that. Not when they'd run into a black bear, not during the lightning storms. That shook the cabin, not ever. He set the mug down and started walking. The air thickened as he crossed the yard, fog pressing closer, muffling everything but Rex's low growl. "Easy, boy," he called softly, the old sergeant's calm threading his voice. The oak loomed ahead, enormous, ancient, older than any fence or deed. It stood like a monument to the land itself, bark rough and gnarled, roots gripping the soil like a clenched fist. Jack had walked past it hundreds of times, never given it a thought. But this morning, something about it was wrong. 6 feet up, the trunk bulged outward in a grotesque swell, as if the tree had swallowed something whole. Cracks spidered through the thick bark, and from them seeped a dark resin, thick and oily. The smell hit him like a slap. Not pine, not sap, not anything natural. It was organic, sour, like something that had lived and died inside the wood. Jack felt his stomach tighten. Rex backed away, tail low, letting out a guttural whine he'd never made before. Jack crouched beside him and rested a gloved hand on his neck. The dog's muscles were taut, trembling. "You smell it too," Jack murmured. Rex's gaze flicked from the tree to his master, pleading, warning. Jack straightened slowly, eyes scanning the fog-drenched forest beyond the clearing. Nothing moved. No birds, no wind, no sound. Just the heavy, waiting silence of something that didn't want to be found. He took a cautious step closer to the oak. The bulge was nearly the size of a man's torso, and the fissures wept slow, black tears. He reached out and touched the bark. Sticky. Cold. Beneath his fingertips, he could feel a faint pulse, a vibration, maybe wind caught in the hollow, maybe something else. His throat went dry. He'd felt this once before, years ago, in the desert, moments before a roadside bomb had gone off. That same quiet pressure in the air, like the earth holding its breath. He stepped back and wiped his hand on his jeans, the sap leaving a dark smear. The smell clung to his skin. Rex whimpered again, pacing, not wanting to leave, not wanting to stay. Jack exhaled slowly. "All right," he said to no one. "Let's see what you're hiding." From his jacket pocket, he drew out an old combat knife, the same one that had followed him through 2 tours overseas. The blade was dull silver, the handle wrapped in faded paracord. It had cut rope, rations, and once his own bootlaces when shrapnel had pinned his leg. He'd promised himself never to use it again. But promises were like trees, he thought. They twisted with time. He pressed the edge of the blade against the bark, just above one of the cracks. The first scrape released a stronger wave of that sickly smell. Rex whimpered louder, circling, ears flat. Jack paused, every instinct screaming that he shouldn't do this. But instincts were what had kept him alive, and right now they told him that whatever was in that tree wanted to be found. He made a second cut, deeper this time. The bark peeled back with a wet sound, exposing a darker layer beneath, not wood, but something smoother. The knife tip struck fabric, old, stiff, and damp. Jack's pulse hammered in his throat. He hooked the blade under it and pulled. A strip of decayed cloth came free, the weave coarse and faded, the color once olive green. Military issue. His breath fogged the air in front of him. He cut again, widening the opening, and another fragment slid loose, a patch of metal, dull but recognizable. A dog tag. The name was half obscured by corrosion, but the letters Dan were still clear. He didn't need the rest. "Daniel," Jack whispered, his oldest friend, his brother in arms, the man who'd vanished on a mission 15 years ago. The world tilted slightly, sound draining away. The fog thickened, and for a second Jack thought he heard Daniel's voice, laughing the way he used to, back when they thought war was something you could leave behind. He blinked, the moment gone. Rex barked sharply, snapping him back. The dog's fur bristled, eyes locked on the tree line. Jack turned. The fog moved differently now, not drifting but shifting, as if something large was out there, moving parallel to the clearing. He couldn't see shapes, only the faint suggestion of motion. His hand tightened around the knife. "Who's there?" he called, the soldier in him taking over. The forest gave no answer, only a soft rustle, then stillness. He looked back at the tree. The dark resin oozed thicker now, glistening like old blood. The bark itself seemed to tighten, as though resisting him. Jack took one more look at the dog tag, his hand trembling. His voice came out low. "What the hell did they do to you, brother?" Rex barked again, louder this time, tail stiff, body angled towards the woods. Jack followed his line of sight but saw only fog and shadow. Somewhere far off, a branch cracked. The sound was deliberate, human. He felt it more than heard it. His pulse quickened. He slid the dog tag into his pocket and closed the knife. "Time to go," he said. They backed away from the tree, step by step. Rex stayed close, never breaking eye contact with the forest. The fog thickened around them again, swallowing the oak until it became just another shape in the mist. By the time they reached the cabin, the first trace of sunlight had begun to stain the horizon pale gold. Jack paused on the porch, looking back toward the tree line. The fog was lifting now, but he could still see the faint outline of that oak standing against the gray. It didn't look like a tree anymore. It looked like a grave. He took one last sip of cold coffee, the bitterness grounding him, and whispered, "Some secrets the earth keeps because it must. Some because someone made it." Rex stood beside him, silent, eyes fixed on the woods. Jack placed a hand on his head, feeling the warmth beneath the fur. "We're not done with this, boy," he said quietly. "Not by a long shot." The dog leaned into his leg, steady and loyal, as the fog thinned into morning. But deep in the forest, under the oaks and the frost, and the weight of 15 years, something had shifted. The silence of Pine Hollow was no longer peace. It was a warning. By the time the fog lifted, morning had turned gray and brittle. The forest outside Jack Turner's cabin seemed to hold its breath. He hadn't slept. The dog tag lay on the table beside a half-empty cup of coffee, the corroded metal catching pale light from the window. 15 years had passed since he'd last heard the name Daniel Moore spoken aloud, and now it glared up at him like an accusation. Daniel had been 2 years younger, lean, sandy-haired, with that crooked grin that could get a squad laughing even after a firefight. Jack could still see him, laughing, cigarette hanging from his lip, saying, "We'll make it home, Sarge, you'll see." But Daniel hadn't. The report said missing in action, presumed dead. The tree said otherwise. Rex lay by the door, restless, amber eyes watching his master. The dog hadn't eaten. He sensed the unease in the air. Outside, the wind pressed against the cabin walls like a hand trying to get in. Jack ran his thumb along the dog tag's edge, rough against skin. 15 years. He muttered, "Why you, Danny? Why here?" The knock came sudden, sharp. Rex was up before Jack moved, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Jack grabbed the old combat knife out of reflex, then stilled. It wasn't that kind of knock, not yet. He opened the door. A woman stood there, framed by cold light. She looked mid-30s, tall and willowy in a weathered brown jacket, auburn hair tied back, boots dusted with frost. Her face was pale, freckled, her eyes a sharp green that missed little. "Jack Turner?" she asked, her tone calm, edged with fatigue. "I'm Claire Hensley, Montana Historical Conservation Office. I left a message last week about a survey near your property." Jack frowned. "Don't recall any message." "You wouldn't," she said, half smiling. Reception out here's worse than the weather." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Jack studied her stance. Professional, guarded, polite. Not the type that got lost in the woods by accident. "You picked a fine morning to count trees," she shrugged. "They don't tell me when nature cooperates." Rex sniffed the air, tail low, eyes fixed on her. Claire froze for half a heartbeat, then relaxed when Jack said, "He won't bite unless you lie." Her lips quirked. "Then I'll keep my truth clean." He motioned her inside. The cabin smelled of smoke, coffee, and something faintly metallic. Claire stepped in, scanning everything, the rifle on the wall, the old photographs, the dog tag glinting on the table. Her gaze lingered on a faded picture of 5 soldiers in desert uniforms, arms slung over shoulders, dust and sunlight on their faces. "You served," she said. "A long time ago," Jack replied. "And you didn't come here about trees, did you?" She hesitated, then exhaled. "Not exactly." Jack gestured toward the chair. "Then let's stop pretending." Claire sat, folding her hands on her lap. 15 years ago, a classified training op was conducted north of here, small, off-record, officially labeled equipment loss, but the personnel list doesn't match the casualty reports. One missing name, Daniel Moore. You served with him, right? Jack froze. The silence stretched. "Where'd you hear that?" "Archives," she said quietly, "and a whistleblower report that disappeared soon after." He studied her. "You don't look like someone with clearance for ghosts." "I'm not. But I've been chasing what the military buries. My brother died in Iraq. They called it friendly fire. The story never added up." Her voice cracked, then steadied. "That's why I'm here. Patterns repeat, and yours sounded familiar." Jack stared at the dog tag. "So you came here for closure?" "No," she said. "For truth." He slid the dog tag toward her. She froze when she read the name. "Where did you—" "Found it inside a tree," Jack said, "along with a piece of uniform." She stared, disbelief flickering into dread. "Inside?" "Yeah. Nature doesn't grow that way unless someone forced it." Claire swallowed hard. "Jack, this is evidence. You should report it." "To who?" His voice cut sharp. "The same people who erased him? Evidence like this vanishes faster than breath." She didn't argue. Her eyes softened instead. "Then let me help. You can't do this alone." Rex gave a single low bark, as if agreeing. Jack leaned back. "Why should I trust you?" "Because if I wanted to hide it, I'd never have knocked," she said. The logic landed. He nodded once. "Fine. We'll start where I found it." They left the cabin, the wind biting harder now. Down the dirt road, a black SUV sat half-hidden behind a bend. No plates visible. Jack didn't mention it. They reached the oak by late morning. The fog had thinned, but the forest still held a muted hush. The bulge on the tree looked darker now, the bark weeping slow black streaks. Claire knelt beside it, fingers brushing the hardened sap. "This isn't disease," she murmured. "Something's embedded here. The growth pattern's reactive. The tree healed over it." Jack crouched beside her. 15 years worth of healing, he said. Give or take. She took out her phone, snapping photos, documenting the strange wound. "You realize if there's a body in there." "Then somebody wanted it forgotten," Jack finished. Rex prowled near the roots, sniffing, ears perked. Suddenly he stopped, paw digging into the soil. Jack bent to look. Something metallic glinted beneath the damp leaves. He brushed it free. A rusted buckle, small, rectangular. "Bootstrap," he said quietly. Claire leaned closer. "Military issue. Same batch as the uniform." The forest went still again. Even the wind paused. Jack looked towards the ridge. A faint echo of movement, branches bending where no breeze reached. Claire noticed, too. "We're not alone," she whispered. Jack's hand drifted toward his jacket pocket where the knife rested. "Keep your camera low." She nodded, slipping the phone away. They waited, breath shallow, but the movement never came closer. Only the uneasy stillness returned. After a long silence, Claire said, "If someone buried this, they'll come back to make sure it stays buried." Jack nodded, eyes narrowing at the empty bend in the road. The SUV was gone. Rex growled softly, tail stiff, body tense. Jack placed a hand on his head, eyes still fixed on the forest. "Looks like the past noticed we're digging," he muttered. "And it doesn't like it." By late afternoon, the sky over Pine Hollow turned the color of lead, heavy clouds piling against the mountains, as though the weather itself didn't want to move on. Jack Turner stood by the porch railing, his coffee long gone cold, eyes fixed on the winding dirt road that cut through the valley below. Ever since that morning with Claire at the oak tree, he'd had the uneasy sense that something had shifted, like the ground beneath his quiet life was cracking open to reveal everything he'd buried. Rex lay near the steps, tail still, ears twitching at every distant hum of an engine. The air had that charged stillness that comes before a storm. When the black SUV appeared again, Jack wasn't surprised. It came slow, steady, as if measuring distance, until it stopped a few yards from the cabin. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was in his late 50s, but carried himself with the stiffness of someone who had once lived by a code of authority. Colonel Richard Hale. The name alone tasted like rust in Jack's mouth. Hale was tall, built broad across the shoulders, wearing a dark wool coat and polished boots that didn't belong on dirt roads. His silver hair was trimmed close, his face lined deep around the mouth, and his eyes, pale gray, cold, analytical, had once commanded respect, maybe even fear. He'd been Jack's commanding officer during the last tour in Afghanistan. To most men, he was the picture of discipline, a strategist who believed control was the same as strength. But Jack had seen the cracks, the ambition that put missions above men, the kind of loyalty that ended when it stopped being useful. Hale stood there now, his breath fogging faintly in the cold. "You haven't changed much, Turner," he said, his voice low and measured. "Still prefer the middle of nowhere?" Jack didn't move from the porch. "I like hearing myself think." Hale smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I remember that. You were always the quiet one, until something bothered you." Rex rose to his feet, muscles tensing under his coat, a low growl building in his chest. Hale's gaze flicked to the dog. "Still keeping watchdogs, I see." Jack's tone hardened. "He keeps the wrong kind of company away." Hale chuckled lightly and took a slow step closer. "No need for hostility, son. I'm just here to talk." Jack didn't invite him in, and the silence stretched until the colonel filled it himself. "You found something out there today, didn't you?" he said casually. Jack's fingers tightened against the railing. "You've been watching me." "Let's call it concern," Hale replied. "When an old friend starts digging into things better left buried, I take notice." "We're not friends," Jack said. Hale tilted his head, the smile fading. "You're right. But we share history, and that's a kind of bond whether you like it or not." He took another step forward, his boots crunching the gravel. "I need to know exactly what you found." Jack said nothing. The colonel's tone shifted, silk over steel. "The past has teeth, Jack. Sometimes it bites the wrong people." Rex growled louder now, stepping between them, hackles raised. The sound vibrated through the air like a warning siren. Hale didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened. You always did have a sense for trouble, he said to the dog, then looked back to Jack. You think that tree means something? You think the tag proves anything? Let it go before it ruins what little life you've got left. You buried a man in that tree, Jack said quietly. You think walking up here with fancy words changes that? Hale's expression didn't move, but the air seemed to thin. Careful, he said softly. Accusations like that have consequences. Jack's voice stayed even. So did orders like yours. They stared at each other across the few feet of gravel, soldier and commander, both shaped by the same war, but carved into opposite sides of the truth. A gust of wind pushed through the trees, scattering dry needles across the porch. Hale looked away first. You always were stubborn, he said. That was your best and worst quality. He reached into his coat, and Rex lunged a step forward, teeth bared. Hale froze, holding up his hand. Easy, just paperwork. He pulled out an envelope and tossed it onto the porch. It landed with a soft slap against the wood. Official notice, he said. The land north of here is being closed for environmental cleanup. You and your friend Miss Hensley will stay clear. That's not a request. Jack didn't look at the envelope. If you wanted to keep things quiet, showing up here yourself was a mistake. Hale smiled again, thin, cold. Maybe I wanted to see if the soldier I knew was still in there. Guess he is. Don't let him get you killed. He turned and started back toward the SUV. Rex barked once, sharp and angry, the sound echoing down the valley. Hale paused at the driver's door and glanced back over his shoulder. Take my advice, Turner, he said. You start pulling at threads, the whole thing unravels, and you won't like what's underneath. The engine roared to life, tires spinning loose gravel as the vehicle rolled away. Jack stood there long after it disappeared into the trees, the wind biting harder now, carrying the smell of storm and rot. He picked up the envelope. Inside was a single page stamped with the government seal, full of legal jargon about restricted zones and environmental hazards. But the last line caught his eye. All investigations under federal review. Contact pending officer, Lieutenant Dennis Crow. The name punched through him. Crow had been one of Hale's lieutenants, a man built from muscle and temper, whose loyalty could be bought with medals. Jack remembered him clearly. Shaved head, tattoo curling up his neck, always chewing gum, like it was the last thing keeping him from violence. Crow had been there the night Daniel disappeared. Jack's hand trembled slightly. He stuffed the page back into the envelope and went inside. Claire was at the table, laptop open, her brow furrowed as she scanned files. When she looked up, her face softened. You look like you saw a ghost. Close, Jack said. Colonel Hale. Her eyes widened. He came here? Just left. He dropped the envelope in front of her. They know we're looking. Claire read the page, her jaw tightening. Environmental cleanup. That's code for something. They're trying to block access. And they've got Crow running interference, Jack said. That man's not cleanup, he's a cleaner. She met his eyes. Then we'd better move fast. Rex paced by the window, nose twitching. Jack poured himself a shot of whiskey, his hand steady now. If Hale's here, it means the secret's closer than he's comfortable with. Claire nodded. Then we make him uncomfortable. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. Jack glanced at the oak's silhouette far beyond the window, the shape dark and swollen against the gray sky. Whatever was buried there had started to stir up more than memory. He turned back to Claire. Tomorrow we dig again, he said. And this time, we find the truth before they find us. The next morning came slow and colorless, the kind of Montana dawn that felt more like a memory than a beginning. Gray light seeped through low clouds, turning the forest around the cabin into a maze of pale shadows and breathless silence. Jack Turner stood in the doorway, a thermos of black coffee steaming in his hand, his eyes on the tree line where yesterday's storm had left everything slick and glistening. The ground smelled of wet earth and pine, and something else, something faintly metallic that clung to the air like a warning. Inside, Claire sat at the table with her laptop open and papers spread across the surface, her red hair tied up in a loose knot, strands falling across her forehead as she typed. Her face looked different in the morning light, sharper, focused, the exhaustion of the previous day giving way to determination. She'd been up all night cross-referencing names, military units, and incident reports. Jack had stopped trying to convince her to rest after the second cup of coffee. He set down his thermos beside her. "Find anything that makes sense?" he asked. Claire didn't look up. "Plenty that doesn't," she said. "But I found one thing that does. Daniel Moore's last known transmission wasn't from Afghanistan. It was from a base in Montana, right here." Jack frowned, the words hitting like a cold slap. "That can't be right. His unit was deployed overseas." Claire turned the screen toward him. "See for yourself. A coded distress signal was routed through a domestic satellite relay 2 weeks after his official disappearance. The encryption is military grade, but I recognize the key pattern. It's the same one used by your division." Jack stared at the data, jaw tightening. He was alive after the mission. "Long enough to try to send something out," Claire said quietly. "He must have realized the people who killed him weren't enemies. They were his own." The room went still, except for the faint hum of the laptop fan. Rex, lying by the fireplace, lifted his head, eyes following Jack's every move. The dog sensed his unease like an echo. Jack reached for his old duffel bag, the one that had followed him through every deployment, and unzipped it. Inside, under a folded flag and a worn photo of his squad, was a small leather pouch. He hadn't opened it in years. The leather was cracked and dry, smelling faintly of sand and oil, Daniel's scent, preserved by time. He sat down, unwrapping the pouch carefully. Inside was Daniel's field journal, the one he'd carried everywhere, small, battered, bound with electrical tape. The pages had yellowed with age, the edges curled from humidity. On the first page, written in Daniel's messy scrawl, were the words, "If you're reading this, it means they found me." Jack swallowed hard and began turning the pages. Claire moved closer, her hand brushing his arm as she leaned in. Together they read the final entries, accounts of late-night meetings, unnamed officers, and shipments that didn't exist on any manifest. Daniel had written about crates marked as medical aid arriving from overseas, but containing weapons and narcotics. He mentioned names, initials mostly, and a phrase that appeared again and again, Project Everline. He'd discovered a trafficking network using humanitarian supply routes to move illegal goods through U.S. bases, under the supervision of high-ranking officials. The last entry ended abruptly. Evidence secure. Data card hidden in place only Jack will understand. If I don't make it, tell Sarah I kept my promise. Jack felt his throat tighten. Sarah had been Daniel's sister, a quiet, artistic woman who had written to him once after Daniel's death. Her letter still sat unopened in Jack's dresser drawer. "He trusted you," Claire said softly. "He thought you'd find it." Jack closed the journal, his knuckles white around the cover. "He sent me a message, but I never got it. Hale must have intercepted the transmission." Claire nodded slowly. "And buried Daniel before anyone could ask questions." Jack stood, walking to the window. Outside, mist crawled between the trees. He could almost see Daniel there, standing tall in his desert fatigues, that half-smile cutting through the dust. "He hid the card somewhere I'd understand," Jack said. more to himself than her. That means it's personal, something only he and I shared. Claire watched him pace, thinking. Could it be the tree? She asked. He mentioned being buried there. Maybe the card's inside with him. Jack shook his head. No, that would have been too obvious. Daniel was smarter than that. He turned back toward the table, his eyes landing on a photograph clipped to the back of the journal. Their squad taken 15 years ago. 5 men grinning in front of a Humvee, dust swirling in the air. Daniel stood beside him, holding up a carved wooden token, a small circle etched with the symbol of a wolf. Jack remembered it now. Daniel had whittled it during downtime, said it reminded him of loyalty. Wolves never abandon their pack. He'd given it to Jack after the last patrol. Jack's pulse quickened. The wolf. Claire looked confused. What? He carved 2 of them. One he gave me, the other he said he'd keep for luck. If he hid the card, he might have sealed it inside his token. He crossed the room, pulling open a drawer where old mementos lay tangled. Pins, maps, folded letters. He found the small wooden circle beneath a rusted compass. It was worn smooth by years of touch. Under the faint light, the carving gleamed. Claire leaned closer. Do you think... Jack didn't answer. He grabbed his pocket knife, sliding the blade into the edge seam. The wood gave with a soft crack. Something metallic fell onto the table, a micro SD card, no bigger than a fingernail. For a moment, neither of them breathed. He did it, Claire whispered. Jack nodded. And now we know why Hale wanted it buried. He handed the card to her. You said you could decrypt? If it's encrypted the same way as his message, yes. But we'll need an offline machine. If we plug this into a live network, it'll light up every tracker they've got. Jack thought for a moment. There's an old outpost about 10 miles west, near Miller's Creek. Abandoned after the fire in '09. No connection, no power grid. Claire closed the laptop and grabbed her jacket. Then that's where we go. Rex barked once, standing at the door. Jack smiled faintly. Guess the team's ready. They packed quickly. Weapons, flashlights, the journal, and the small drive sealed in a metal tin. Jack locked the cabin door and scanned the horizon one last time. The forest was quiet, but the kind of quiet that hides listening ears. As they started down the dirt road, a flash of light caught Jack's eye, a reflection from the ridge above. He recognized it instantly, the glint of a rifle scope. Down, he shouted, pulling Claire to the ground. A gunshot cracked the still air, splintering bark inches from where she'd stood. Rex barked furiously, his body pressed close to Jack's. The echo rolled through the valley like thunder. Jack dragged Claire behind a fallen log. They found us, she said, breathless. No, Jack replied, scanning the ridge through the trees. They never lost us. He could see faint movement up the slope, 2 figures in tactical black, moving low, controlled. Crow's men, he muttered. Claire gritted her teeth. What do we do? Jack chambered around in his rifle, his voice calm, measured, the soldier in him fully awake. We finish what Daniel started. Night came down on Pine Hollow like a closing fist. The storm clouds rolled in from the north, heavy and bruised, swallowing what little light was left. Jack Turner could feel the air thickening, the still electric weight of violence about to break. Inside the cabin, the lamps were out. Only the faint orange glow from the fireplace lit the room, flickering across Claire's tense face as she worked on the old military laptop they had salvaged from the abandoned outpost. Her green eyes were fixed on the screen, hair loose now, tangled from the wind and exhaustion. She looked determined, but hollowed by fear. The files are loading, she whispered, voice trembling slightly. If I can get into the secure partition, we'll have proof that Daniel was right. Jack checked the window. The road was empty, but the forest beyond moved wrong, branches swaying where the wind didn't reach. Rex, lying near the door, suddenly lifted his head and gave a low growl, ears forward, eyes bright and alert. Jack's hand went to his Colt revolver, the old steel heavy and familiar. "They're here," he muttered. Claire froze. "Hale?" Jack nodded grimly. He wouldn't let us get this far unless he planned to end it tonight. He crossed to the window again, peering through the gap in the curtains. Headlights flashed once, then cut out. Silence followed, deep and absolute. Then, the soft crunch of boots on gravel. Jack turned off the laptop screen with a quick motion. "Stay down," he said, pulling Claire behind the kitchen counter. Rex positioned himself in front of her, muscles coiled like a spring. A car door slammed outside, and another followed. The old boards of the porch creaked under weight. Then came the voice. Smooth, controlled, familiar. "Jack," Colonel Richard Hale called, "I told you some truth should stay buried. You didn't listen." The door handle rattled, once, twice. Jack tightened his grip on the Colt. "You're trespassing, Colonel. Last warning." Hale's tone carried amusement. "You always were dramatic." A second voice, rougher, came from behind him. Lieutenant Dennis Crow, thick-bodied, bald, with a jagged scar that ran from his temple to his cheek. His eyes were small and flat, the color of dirty steel, and his grin showed a line of yellowed teeth. Crow had been built for violence. His arms were inked with old military tattoos and a faded skull on his wrist. He was the kind of man who found comfort in the sound of guns. "You want me to knock the door in, sir?" he said. Hale didn't answer right away. He stepped into the weak moonlight, his polished boots glinting. He wore no uniform now, just a black coat over a gray turtleneck, like a man who still pretended to lead armies in his mind. "No need," Hale said. "Jack's a soldier. He'll open the door himself." Jack glanced toward Claire. She shook her head, mouthing, "Don't." But Jack had already made up his mind. "They'll burn the place if I don't," he whispered. He stepped to the door, opening it halfway, revolver at his side. Rain dripped from the eaves, the air carrying that sharp ozone scent before a storm. Hale stood a few feet away, Crow behind him, and another man, young, maybe 30, in tactical gear with a sniper rifle slung across his back, his face pale and expressionless. "Evening, Jack," Hale said, his smile ghostly. "You've got something that belongs to me." Jack's voice was quiet, steady. "I've got something that belongs to Daniel Moore." Hale's expression shifted, just slightly, annoyance flickering beneath the calm. "You think you understand what happened? Daniel was reckless. He stumbled into something bigger than either of us." "He stumbled into your operation," Jack shot back. "Drugs, weapons, blood money buried under patriotism." Hale sighed. "You always had a flair for moral outrage. That's what made you a good soldier, and a terrible survivor." Crow stepped forward, his boots sinking into the mud. "This can go easy, old man," he said, voice low and gravelly. "Hand over the card, and maybe the lady gets to keep breathing." Rex snarled at the sound, stepping forward, fur raised along his spine. Hale lifted a hand. "Control your animal, Jack." "He's more human than you'll ever be," Jack replied. For a moment, everything held still. Wind, rain, time itself. Then the first shot shattered the quiet. The young soldier had drawn first, firing through the window. The glass exploded inward, scattering shards across the floor. Jack ducked, pulling Claire to the ground. Rex lunged toward the door, barking furiously. Hale's voice cut through the chaos. "Crow, finish it!" Bullets tore through the wood panels, as Jack crawled toward the table, grabbed the rifle, leaning against it, and returned fire. His shots were clean, precise. One clipped the edge of the porch post, another shattered the headlight of Hale's Jeep, plunging the yard into darkness again. Claire scrambled toward the laptop, clutching it to her chest. "Jack, the files! They're almost decrypted!" "Forget the files," he shouted. "We need cover," Rex growled and bolted outside before Jack could stop him. The dog's bark cut through the rain, fierce, defiant. Jack glimpsed him through the doorway, leaping at Crow just as the man raised his gun. The shot echoed like thunder. Rex hit the ground hard, yelping once before falling silent. "No!" Jack roared, his chest hollowing out as if something inside him had been torn loose. Claire gasped, tears springing to her eyes. Crow laughed, dark and breathless. "One less mutt." Jack's hand shook, not with fear but rage. He raised his rifle and fired. The bullet struck Crow square in the chest, throwing him backward against the Jeep door. Hale turned sharply, drawing his own weapon, but Jack was faster. The Colt thundered. Once, twice. One shot grazing Hale's shoulder, the second catching him in the ribs. He staggered, dropping to one knee, his face twisted with disbelief. Rain poured harder now, drenching everything in silver streaks. Jack stepped outside, gun still raised. Hale's breath came ragged, blood darkening his coat. "You think killing me fixes anything?" Hale rasped. "You don't know how deep it goes." Jack stood over him, his voice low. "I don't care how deep it goes. It ends here." Hale's hand twitched toward his sidearm, but Jack fired once more. The colonel fell back, eyes staring blankly into the sky. For a long moment, only the sound of rain filled the clearing. Claire stumbled out behind Jack, the laptop clutched to her chest, her hair plastered to her face. "Jack," she whispered. He lowered the Colt, breathing hard, the weight of it suddenly unbearable. Then he turned to Rex. The dog lay motionless by the porch, fur matted with blood, eyes half open but fading. Jack knelt beside him, voice breaking. "You did good, boy. You did damn good." Rex's tail thumped weakly once, then went still. Claire knelt beside him, tears mixing with rain. "We have to move," she said softly. "They'll send more." Jack nodded, wiping his face with a trembling hand. "Grab the drive. We finish this for him. For Rex." He stood, the storm washing the blood from his hands. In the distance, thunder rolled again, deeper this time, like the earth itself was mourning. Behind them the cabin smoldered, one of Hale's bullets having struck a lantern. Jack didn't look back. He walked into the rain, shoulders squared, the memory of his fallen friend and dog burning behind his eyes. The war he thought he'd left 15 years ago had finally come home. And this time, he wasn't fighting for orders. He was fighting for the truth. Morning came with the sound of sirens and the smell of wet ash. The storm had passed, leaving behind a wounded landscape, blackened timbers where Jack Turner's cabin once stood, the air heavy with smoke and rain. Red and blue lights flashed across the clearing as police cruisers and fire trucks lined the dirt road. Officers moved like ghosts through the wreckage, their radios crackling, boots sinking into mud. Jack stood near what remained of the porch, wrapped in a gray blanket, a patch of dried blood on his sleeve. His hair, streaked with gray, was plastered to his forehead, his face hollow but steady. Beside him, Claire Hensley spoke quietly with a sheriff, holding the metal tin that contained Daniel's micro SD card. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was a fire behind them, the same fire that had carried them through the night. The sheriff, Tom Rayburn, was a broad man in his 50s, built like an old linebacker, with thinning blonde hair and a mustache that made him look perpetually skeptical. He'd been in law enforcement for 25 years, and had seen just enough corruption to know when something didn't smell right. "You're telling me this all connects to a federal operation?" he asked, voice low. Claire nodded. "To a cover-up that cost soldiers their lives. We have proof, names, shipments, payment records. Everything's in here." She tapped the tin. Tom rubbed his jaw, exhaling through his nose. "Hell of a mess you've dragged me into." "We didn't drag you," Jack said quietly. "We survived it." Reporters had begun to arrive, cameras flashing in the cold morning light. Jack hated it, the way they swarmed, hungry for tragedy dressed as truth. Claire stood close to him as microphones were shoved in their faces. "Mr. Turner," one woman said, her tone sharp with curiosity, "is it true you were part of the same unit as Daniel Moore?" Jack hesitated. Her name tag read, Amanda Ruiz, early 30s, Latina, tall and lean, her long black hair pulled back into a braid, sharp brown eyes flickering between sympathy and calculation. She had the voice of someone who'd spent years chasing stories that mattered, and the scars of learning how few people wanted them told. "Yeah," Jack said. "We served together. He was my friend." "Sources say Colonel Richard Hale and his men were involved in illegal arms distribution," Amanda pressed. "Do you confirm that?" Claire shot her a warning look. "He just lost everything last night. Let the investigation speak for itself." Amanda lowered her mic slightly, softening her tone. "I'm sorry, but people deserve to know who did this." Jack met her gaze. "You'll have the truth soon enough. Just make sure it's told right." Hours later, the flash drives and Daniel's journal were in police custody, catalogued as evidence under Tom Rayburn's supervision. The sheriff made a point of sealing the box himself, his signature, scrawled across the tape. "Feds will be all over this by sundown," he said, "but I'll make damn sure the right ones get it." Claire gave him a small nod of gratitude. "You're one of the good ones, Sheriff," he grunted. "Don't say that too loud. You'll ruin my reputation." By noon, the rain returned, softer this time, a cleansing drizzle that washed soot from the leaves. Jack stood by a patrol car, watching the cabin's last smoke trail fade into the clouds. Claire approached, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. She handed him one, her hand trembling slightly from exhaustion. "They'll call you a hero," she said. Jack took a sip, grimacing at the bitterness. "Heroes die young. The rest of us just live long enough to remember why." She looked at him for a long moment. "You don't have to carry this alone." "I've been carrying it for 15 years, he said. "Another day won't make a difference." The next week passed in a blur of hearings, interrogations, and news coverage. Federal agents arrived from Washington, their black SUVs replacing the ones that had brought death. Files were decrypted, testimonies recorded, and one by one, the names of officers, contractors, and foreign intermediaries appeared in headlines. The scandal spread fast. A wildfire of truth no one could stop. Colonel Hale's connection to the smuggling ring became undeniable. Evidence from Daniel's journal matched bank transfers, satellite images, and internal communications. Within days, Project Everline was exposed as a covert military scheme that had funneled weapons into black markets under the guise of humanitarian aid. The government issued statements of outrage and regret. Posthumous honors were granted to Daniel Moore for extraordinary service and integrity. His sister, Sarah Moore, attended the press conference, a slender woman in her 30s with auburn hair and the same gentle eyes Daniel had once had. She wore a simple black dress, her posture straight but trembling. When she met Jack for the first time outside the courthouse, she extended her hand. "He trusted you," she said, her voice soft but firm. "He always said if anything ever happened to him, you'd be the one to tell the truth." Jack's throat tightened. He saved my life. Twice." She smiled faintly. "Then I guess you saved his legacy?" Claire stood beside them, watching as reporters swarmed again, this time celebrating rather than probing. She leaned toward Jack. "You did it," she said quietly. "It's over." Jack looked out at the crowd, the flags, the cameras, the officials shaking hands, and felt only emptiness. "It's never over," he said. "Not for the ones who didn't come back." A few days later, Jack drove out of town in his old truck, the road curling along the Bitterroot Range. The sky had cleared, blue and endless. On the passenger seat lay a folded American flag and 2 sets of dog tags, Daniel's and Rex's, bound together by a single piece of twine. He drove until he reached the small veterans' cemetery outside Missoula, a quiet patch of green bordered by pine trees. The grass was still damp from rain. He parked, grabbed his hat, and walked slowly through the rows of white stones until he found them. Daniel Moore, hero, brother, soldier, and beside it, a smaller marker carved simply with Rex. Faithful to the end. He knelt between them, knees pressing into the cool earth. "You kept your word, Danny," he said softly. "You didn't let them win." His voice trembled. "You gave your life for honor. And I just lived long enough to tell your story." He placed the tags on Daniel's stone, then set a single carved wooden wolf between the 2 markers, the symbol of their bond, their promise. A breeze whispered through the trees, rustling the grass, and for a moment Jack thought he heard Rex's bark echo faintly across the valley. Claire stood a few steps behind, hands clasped, eyes shining with quiet respect. "You ready?" she asked gently. Jack rose slowly, his joints aching but his spirit lighter. "Not yet," he said. "I want to watch the sun come up first." They waited in silence as the horizon began to burn gold, light spilling across the stones. The war, the lies, the darkness, all of it fading with the dawn. When the first beam touched the names carved in marble, Jack whispered, "Rest easy, brothers. The world finally knows." 1 year later, Montana had changed its colors again. The snow on the Bitterroot Range had melted into silver streams that carved through the valley, and the air smelled of pine sap and spring rain. The town of Pine Hollow, once a quiet, forgotten place, now carried the hum of visitors who came not for its scenery, but for what it had come to represent: sacrifice, truth, and a dog's unbreakable faith. A new monument stood at the edge of the memorial park, a bronze statue of a German shepherd, life-sized, poised mid-stance with its head lifted toward the horizon. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Rex, loyal to the end. May his courage remind us what loyalty truly means." Jack Turner stood before the statue, hands in the pockets of his worn leather jacket. His hair was whiter now, beard trimmed close, his shoulders still straight despite the years weighing on him. He looked older, but not weaker, the kind of man who had made peace with his scars. The ceremony had ended an hour ago. The crowd dispersed, leaving behind only a scattering of flowers and ribbons at the statue's base. He'd shaken more hands than he cared to remember, state officials, veterans, reporters, and strangers who wanted to say they'd met the man who told the truth. But all Jack had wanted was a moment of quiet, here, where memory didn't need an audience. Claire Hensley approached from behind, her boots crunching softly on the gravel path. She wore a dark green coat over jeans and a cream scarf, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders. A year had changed her too. The restless energy in her eyes had settled into calm confidence. After the scandal broke, she'd left the state job and become a full-time investigative journalist, writing stories that honored those who couldn't speak for themselves. "They did a good job on him," she said softly, nodding toward the statue. He looks proud." Jack smiled faintly. "He was." He knelt, brushing a hand across the cold metal of Rex's paw. He deserved better than bullets and headlines. Claire crouched beside him. "You both did." He shook his head. "I just survived. He's the reason I'm still here." Nearby, a small group of children were playing near the reflecting pond. One of them, a boy about 10 with messy blonde hair, knelt to place a small wooden wolf carving beside the statue. Jack watched him curiously. The boy's mother, a tall woman in her mid-30s with kind blue eyes and sun-kissed skin, approached and smiled apologetically. "I'm sorry. He wanted to leave that here," she said. "He said the dog reminded him of his dad's service dog." Jack waved her off gently. "It's a good place for it." She nodded gratefully, her voice soft. "My husband didn't come back from Afghanistan, but he always said dogs were the only ones who never judged soldiers for what war made them." She paused. "Thank you for what you did, Mr. Turner. For telling the truth." Jack only nodded. When she walked away with her son, he looked down at the wooden wolf, its carving almost identical to Daniel's. Rough, simple, but full of meaning. He smiled quietly, feeling the old ache in his chest shift into something lighter. Later that afternoon, the sky began to turn gold. The park emptied until only Jack and Claire remained. They walked along the path lined with new plaques, names of soldiers, donors, and rescue canines memorialized through the Rex Foundation, the non-profit Jack had built with Claire's help. It provided rehabilitation and companionship programs for veterans struggling with PTSD, pairing them with retired service dogs. What began as a tribute to Rex had become a lifeline for dozens of people across the state. Claire stopped near the entrance archway, where a new mural was being painted by a young woman, Maya Delaney, an artist in her 20s with short black hair streaked with blue, freckles across her nose, and a quiet, focused expression. Her hands were stained with paint, her denim jacket splattered with color. The mural showed a soldier kneeling beside a dog under a fading sunset. Two silhouettes, equal in strength and solitude. "She's good," Claire said, admiring the work. Jack nodded. "She's a veteran's kid. Lost her father in Iraq. Said painting helps her make sense of what's left." Claire looked at him with a faint smile. "Sounds familiar." He chuckled softly. "Guess we're all just trying to make sense of what's left." They stopped by a bench facing the statue. The oak tree behind it, the very one that had once hidden Daniel's grave, now stood tall and healthy again, its bark healed over time, its branches wide like open arms. Jack sat down slowly, resting his hands on his knees. "You ever think about him?" Claire asked. Jack didn't need to ask who she meant. "Every day. He saved me twice, once in the desert, once in the woods." He looked toward the horizon. He believed truth mattered, even when it killed him. Claire's eyes softened. "He'd be proud of you." Jack smiled faintly. "He'd probably tell me I took too long." A cool wind swept through the park, stirring the leaves, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and rain. Somewhere far off, a dog barked, deep, distant, almost familiar. Jack's chest tightened, but not from sorrow. He looked up at the sky, where the light of sunset turned the clouds to molten gold. "You hear that, Rex?" he murmured. "Guess you're still keeping watch." Claire stood beside him, her voice barely above a whisper. "What now?" He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Now we keep building, for the ones who didn't make it home. For the ones who did, but never really came back." Claire smiled, understanding. "The foundation's growing fast. You sure you're ready to handle fame?" "Fame," he scoffed. "I'm too old for that. I just want peace." She laughed, softly. "Then you picked the wrong country." They sat in silence as the light faded. Around them, the sounds of evening rose. Crickets, rustling leaves, the faint hum of a town moving on. Jack reached into his pocket, pulling out his worn dog tags and setting them beside him on the bench. "You know," he said, "I used to think loyalty was just about following orders. But it's not. It's about standing by something even when no one else will." Claire nodded. "That's what makes it rare." The first stars began to appear. Jack stood, stretching his back, and looked once more at the statue. The bronze glinted under the lamplight, Rex's face captured mid-bark, alive, eternal. Jack placed a hand on its head and whispered, "You did good, boy. You did damn good." As they left the park, the wind picked up again, soft but insistent, brushing through the trees like a whispered promise. Jack turned for one last look. The oak stood silent, watching over the statue, and for a fleeting second he thought he saw movement, the shadow of a German shepherd standing beneath it, tail wagging, waiting. He smiled. The fear was gone now, replaced by something steadier. Faith. Faith that loyalty, the kind that endures through war and loss and time, could still save whatever part of the human soul refused to give up. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't come with thunder or light from the heavens. They arrive quietly, in the loyalty of a dog, the courage of a soldier, or the simple act of telling the truth when it's easier to stay silent. Jack didn't just survive a war. He witnessed what love, loyalty, and faith can do, how they can turn pain into purpose and loss into legacy. And maybe that's what God intended all along, that in the darkest hours we find His light not in miracles above, but in the hearts that refuse to give up down here. So tonight, wherever you are, hold your loved ones a little closer, forgive a little faster, believe a little deeper, because faith still moves mountains, sometimes through the paws of a loyal friend,